Alright, YouTube, it's time for today's big Podesta leak revelation from WikiLeaks, of course, and that's that Hillary Clinton suggested the vague possibility, because somehow we discovered Japan. I'm not sure what she means by that in any context. Specifically, that we could ring China with anti-missile systems, and then essentially we could claim the whole Pacific and call it the American Ocean or something like that. On its surface, this is true. We do have the naval capabilities and the bases and the allies in the region to do so, and we could claim basically all of the Pacific up to the Filipinos' own territorial waters and Japan's territorial waters. Who would tell us we can't? The Chinese certainly can't do anything about it, neither can Russia. Russia has essentially a Black Sea and North Atlantic capability, not much in the way of a Pacific capability these days, other than some subs that they have there. There's nobody else in the region with a naval capacity capable of challenging us, and several of the more major naval players are our allies, so nobody would, I think, give a shit. They've got their territorial waters. And we could probably, if we wanted to claim that, we'd probably get Japan and Taiwan and Philippines and Vietnam and a half dozen other states on board just by promising to bully the Chinese around over the South China Sea to arbitrate that finally. We'd probably do that. But is it a wise solution considering that China has something like 400 nuclear weapons? I argue probably not. It's probably better to try to use diplomacy, and then if the fighting breaks out, yeah, those anti-missile systems are great. By the way, I'll say this. I don't have a problem with anti-missile systems going up to ring China. I don't. They're not offensive weapons, they're defensive weapons. Most of those countries in that region, especially those that are directly allied with us, have been begging us for such systems for a long time. Yeah, let them get them. Put them in Japan, put them in Taiwan, put them in Vietnam and the Philippines, put them in South Korea. Give them to India if they want them, and or Pakistan. Let them have some of those systems. Give them to the Nepalese. Give one to Bhutan or something like that. That's fine by me. But to try to conflate these things and group them together, and then to state that essentially this is an attempt just to frighten the Chinese, that's more Cold War antagonism, and I can't support that. The idea of simply stationing anti-missile systems in some of these nations becomes especially appropriate, not even because of China, but when you think of North Korea's increasing capabilities. Yes, their capabilities are increasing slowly, but they're increasing pretty fast on an overall timeline. They're probably a couple steps away from developing a hydrogen bomb. They're not that far away from having the capability to fit at least their earlier style weapons onto a medium or long-range missile. They're not that far behind many parts of the world. They're ahead of India and Pakistan now when it comes to atomic capabilities. And I think that Hillary Clinton grossly underestimates them when she stated in one of the Podesta leaks, one of the Goldman speeches, oh, they have a dying and half-defunct civilian nuclear capability. I think you're probably wrong, and unfortunately for her, this speech was made before their last couple of atomic tests. So I think that she grew tired and weary of the situation and assumed everything would be sunny and happy. She does correctly point out, though, essentially what Trump has been saying, which is that the Chinese control North Korea. Or they did, till Kim Jong-un decided to kill dear old Uncle Jang, and basically slap the face of a couple of Chinese ambassadors and tell them to fuck themselves. Which he has, admittedly. That was an unforeseen, potentially, event. I don't think anybody, including Clinton or Trump or anybody else under the sun, saw that one coming. Seems suicidal when you think about it, but apparently they don't care. The idea, though, of ringing China in an aggressive manner, in a manner as though, for instance, we say, okay, well, the Pacific up to your territorial waters, now it's our territory. We're claiming the whole thing. By the way, we're putting like thousands of anti-missile systems here. Fuck yourself. That would be a gross antagonism of a state that we do a great deal of trade with. And one of the frequent criticisms, the funny part, is that Clinton has always talked about Trump during this campaign and said, well, he's going to piss off our trade partners, he's going to start trade wars, he's going to endanger trade. You're talking about endangering all trade with China, which is one of the main exporters that supplies us with goods. Now, granted, overall, Mexico is our biggest trading partner now, and China is a fairly distant number two. But still an important trading partner, and a potential ally, believe it or not. China's moving away from communism. They haven't been building thousands of nuclear weapons. They have a few hundred of them, and they've basically stopped. We're not sure of their exact level of capabilities, but we haven't detected any nuclear tests from them lately. Largely, it looks like what they really want is a maritime area that they can control, and they want to bully their neighboring states around. Has it come to blows yet? No. Some Vietnamese fishing vessels got rammed. That's regrettable. And I think, by the way, one of the best moves of the Obama administration over the last few years is to draw Vietnam in with trade. The Vietnamese appear to be very, very concerned about the Chinese trying to take a large proportion of their actual sea territory that they themselves claim. If that happens, then just because they were allies decades ago doesn't mean they're going to stay allies today. The age of communism is over in that region. You've got more interventionism going on in D.C. right now than in most of these states. That fact, coupled with China's increasing aggression and its increasing military capabilities at sea, is worrying these other states. There's a reason why Japan has scrapped its pacifism doctrine. There's a reason why the South Koreans want anti-missile systems. There's a reason why the Taiwanese want them too. There's a reason why in the Philippines, despite the fact that the president there is taking a hard line towards the U.S., not exactly being conciliatory towards China either, for the most part, and is essentially telling the world to go fuck itself. The Vietnamese are now on board, Thailand increasingly. We don't need, by the way, the TPP or its big brother, the TIPP, for this. We can use regular old trade deals or just let the free market take over and say, okay, trade between companies, on a private level, and we'll just make sure that the shipments get in, don't get hijacked by pirates or something like that. It's exceptionally odd that Clinton, on the surface, talks about peace and love and diversity and multiculturalism and all this other stuff that she doesn't even believe in, probably. And then, behind the scenes, she's talking like she's Joe McCarthy. In fact, she's talking like Hubert Humphrey or whoever that dude was who said we should preemptively strike the commies with nuclear weapons and then just take whatever we get in return. By the way, it would have been possible to do that back then. We could have done so. Too late now. Of course, now the Russians have as many nukes as we have, and they're actually bigger. Impossible today. We had 3 or 4 times as many nuclear weapons, and they were generally better and a lot more accurate back then in the 50s and 60s. Now it's that ship has sailed long ago. It's been a long time. The boomers were barely being born back when we had an advantage over the Russians in that field. Now we, technology-wise, it looks like some of our missiles are behind what China's fielding. But, to antagonize a state by saying, well, maybe we'll just claim the whole Pacific Ocean. Doesn't this seem a little warmongering to you? Doesn't it seem a little bit antagonistic? I thought that all the Democrats, supposedly they wanted, peace. They wanted to be left alone. They wanted to grow their organic pot garden and be left alone, largely, and then have more welfare, I guess. That's sort of what they were like, a decade ago, on the heels of the Bush administration. They're marching around, smoking their pot and waving peace signs and wearing hippie-trippy clothes and stuff, pretending it was, Woodstock or something like that. Now, all of a sudden, their candidate is more of a warmonger than Bush ever could have been. Even George W. knew better than to tangle with the Chinese for no reason. Here's a Hillary Clinton that almost seems to have a bipolar policy. Because, of course, at the same time that she talks about getting tough on China and apparently talks the same in her Goldman speeches, she also does tidy business with them. Bubba Bill was a great friend of the Chinese, probably received tens of millions in slush fund kickbacks from the Chinese for leaving them alone on human rights issues. I am not seeing how her foreign policy can work out, though. She's talking about antagonizing Russia and China at the same time. Now, the U.S. has more power than either of them on their own, certainly. But combined, if you drive them into a closer relationship out of a sense of survival, it's going to become a huge problem. You're talking about most of Asia united under one general allied banner. We've already got BRICS going on. Now, on the fiscal end, it's falling apart. India increasingly appears to be looking westward. If Trump is elected, I expect India will be one of the best friends we ever have, because Trump appears to appreciate Hindu nationalism and has spoken about how specifically the sort of Clintons have gone after the Modi camp. India could become a great ally and friend to the West, and they'd be better off. The West would be better off for it It'd be better to get our goods there priced a little higher. Okay, that's fine. Rather than from the Chinese, it'd be better to prop them up. It'd also be good to have better leverage to try to get an actual lasting peace, sort of over the border dispute between India and Pakistan, as well involving China. You have a three-way race for a rather large swath of land that could blow up into a regional conflict at any time. If you solve the problem at least between Pakistan and India, because the Chinese will never come to the table, makes things a hell of a lot easier on our diplomats too. That's what we should be doing. Instead, Hillary Clinton's talking about, oh, fuck this regime, fuck this state, fuck Syria, we're going to destroy that. Screw the Iranians, we're going to destroy them. We'll probably go after the Saudis and the Yemenis at the same time, which makes no sense. Screw the Russians. Now, these Eastern European states, oh, they're no good. Bill Clinton calling out Poland and Hungary not that long ago. We're also going to antagonize China. Are you nuts? We have a lot of projective force. We have the best military on earth, but we're not quite that strong. Even with our massively bloated budget, you think you can take on Russia and China and Iran and Syria and all of these other states at the same time that are going to start flying off diplomatically? The United States, if it wants to maintain hegemony over the vast core of the world, because right now, remember, most of East Asia is allied with us. Half of Latin America are our allies, and the rest are at least trading partners other than the Venezuelans. Most of Europe is friendly towards the United States. Large swaths of Africa, parts of the South Pacific, certainly Pakistan, we basically control them, India increasingly, and so forth. Most of the world is relatively friendly towards the United States, at least enough to trade with us and not block us out entirely if we make a mistake. Clinton is talking about a policy whereby a miscalculation could cause the rise of nationalist movements in Europe that are positive and will do better than the failed EU superstate, but we will have alienated them. The Polish will no longer be positive towards the US. Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic almost certainly. You could see France leaving our sort of web of alliances, Germany potentially, even the UK. This is the same party that went after the British people and talked about how horrible a thing it would be if there was a Brexit. And there was a Brexit, and Obama got egg on his face. Clinton has continued this Merkelite line, and even says openly, oh, well, I admire Angela Merkel. You know, that politician who now has lost her own home city and is probably going to get kicked out of her office and never be able to return to politics because increasingly the far left, the far right, and everybody in between hates her? That's who she admires? Yeah, Angela Merkel's policies, they've been done a very good job of cracking Europe apart. What had been very peaceful and people were complacent and they just wanted to eat croissants or drink beer or whatever else they do in each respective state, they can no longer do that because they've been overrun. They've been destabilized to the point at which even I think it was the British Minister of Immigration or somebody along those lines a few days ago chimed in and said, oh, well, we thought it'd be great to bring a bunch of people, refugees and immigrants from the Islamic world here. We thought it'd be great. It'd be diversity. It would increase our economy. And that hasn't happened because they're not assimilating. Increasingly, all across Europe, this is happening. The fact is, we don't need a total closed-off, intervention-laden nationalist line here in the United States, but we can't keep pissing on people for taking that stance up in an area that's totally different. Europe is not the United States. This is the reason why the EU is failing in the first place. Clinton's treating them, and Obama has treated them like they're an extension of the United States. Then you look to India and Pakistan, you look at East Asia, you look at all of these regions of the world. The United States policy, since Bush, especially, through Obama and continuing on if Clinton is elected, makes no sense. It's the best possible way when you get these organic movements. We should go back to doing business like we did 100 years ago. Okay, we don't care if you're a monarchy, nationalist, that's fine. Full capitalist, total free market, like libertarians, that's great. Commies, okay, well, we can't do that here, but okay, you do what you want. We'll trade with you all. We're not going to antagonize you. We don't need to be world police anymore. Supposedly, according to Obama, because the USSR is dead, we don't really have an adversary on the world stage. Well, then why do we need to police the world? I have no problem with defending our allies. It'd be a lot cheaper just to drop a bunch of anti-air, anti-missile systems there and then leave anyway. Half these countries no longer even want our bases there. Increasingly, Philippines. I don't blame them. After what Obama's talked about in regards to their president, who's apparently rated fairly high, doing a fairly good job, all things considered. I don't blame them for being pissed off at Obama. You would be too if you were there. You saw the problems of cartels and drug dealing and so forth, and somebody came along to clean it up. Suddenly you can actually go out at night in your neighborhood, where before you couldn't. And then here comes along Mr. Obama to talk about how dastardly and evil your president is. Especially when Obama reigns over the largest population of people imprisoned for nonviolent drug offenses in the world. The only significant population like that in the world. Even over in Europe, where they still keep these things illegal half the time, they'll look the other way. If it's simple possession, they'll try to get people treatment. Portugal, of course, is even better. So he's just a hypocrite. Clinton's a hypocrite. At the same time that she talks peacemaking, or she says, well, Donald Trump doesn't understand foreign policy. He'll alienate our allies. So China is not a trade partner now? We don't do trade with China? What about Russia? You're going to antagonize them. Poland and Hungary aren't our allies? The Philippines aren't our allies? I thought they were. I thought that all of those three states were allied with us. That the Chinese, they're not in an alliance. They are a competitor, but at the same time they sell us a lot of goods. By the way, we sell them increasingly a lot of goods too, partially because our currency has tanked in value, and they can now buy U.S. goods because they've got a middle class there finally. Now, Clinton's talking about pissing off some dozens of states to the point at which they might not want to associate with us anymore. Then what do? They get gobbled up by the Russians or the Chinese. Well, great. In your haste to antagonize the Russians and the Chinese, you severely empowered them, and you've endangered our standing as the sole world power. Great job, Hillary. That's wonderful. And what have we got to show for it? By then, we'll have claimed the Pacific Ocean, apparently. But we won't even be able to defend it anymore because you've empowered our enemies, and now all the other nuclear states are their friends other than, hopefully, the British. And even that might be a far cry. Look at what Obama did, pissing around over in the UK over the Brexit referendum. You could see a world in which all of the other, significant players, the UK, the French, the Germans, China and Russia, of course, the Saudis and the Iranians to some degree, Japan and some of these other major players, these major economies or military states, especially where they have nukes, start to form their own spheres. You go back to the way the world was around World War I, where instead of having essentially a monopolar world with a couple of other lesser powers that have smaller spheres, and twain are kind of equal to that sole monopower. The United States, of course, and then Russia and China as counterparts. With the UK and France on board, nuclear states, large economies, Germany certainly, and in fact the whole EU. Most of East Asia, certainly the Japanese economy is enormous. With all of these states conglomerated together, along with, again, half of Latin America, parts of Africa and South Asia, increasingly India, it's a monopolar world. The U.S. takes all. Russia has the ability to challenge us in the occasional proxy conflict. China has the ability to bully some of the lesser states around, knowing full well if we truly got involved, they'd be destroyed. But Clinton's foreign policy threatens to amalgamate those two main competitors, the Russians and the Chinese, into one. Subsequently, we may end up pissing off enough states around the fringes of their two respective spheres, so that we no longer have a hold over what's going on in the world. We'll have to struggle for another 20 to 30 years to make up for lost time, if she implements that style of policy. Now, it's not just up to her. If elected, Congress has to consent to much of this. She will browbeat them. She will sign the TPP, which will destroy the economy of the United States in the first place, and oddly enough, eventually, it'll empower the Chinese. They'll get a hold of it somehow. Trump is correct when he claims this. It would be a terrible, terrible loss for our country. It'd be a terrible loss for the world. Oddly enough, if you're worried about the Russians, Clinton's foreign policy may inevitably cause them to rise back up and become part of a bipolar world. Right now, they're not. Right now, they are lesser than us in terms of their military size. Their military's smaller in every aspect except for nukes and tanks. And tanks, really, they can't stand up to modern aircraft very well. They're just a perimeter defense against land invasion, basically, or the ability to project beyond their physical borders through land. They'd have to use Iran primarily for this, or maybe Kazakhstan if they let them in. Russia's economy is far smaller. In fact, it's smaller than that of the nation of Italy, famously. China's not. China's the second largest economy. Their military is increasingly becoming powerful. These two states together become extremely powerful, almost as powerful as the U.S. is. With their spheres, they could easily challenge NATO. They couldn't win against it. It'd still be mutually assured destruction. There'd be no, like, invasion of Chinese or something like that. But they could challenge us. They're the proxy wars that are already quite numerous going on in the Middle East especially would become more numerous. The world would destabilize. It's something that we haven't seen in a generation. It is very dangerous, in my estimation, to adopt that style of foreign policy. I think we should try to work with these states. If it's impossible to do so, we at the very least need to keep on the better side of all of our allies, not piss off the Filipinos and the Polish and the Hungarians and the parties that are rising in Germany, France, and the UK. It's a terrible idea to do that. It's a terrible idea to spurn the Japanese or South Koreans when they do ask for anti-air systems, but it's also a bad idea to openly antagonize the Chinese by putting them all around with the sole goal of bullying them. It'd be a terrible idea. That's about all. Peace out.